Hello and welcome to week 6 in the psychology of adulthood. And we're taking on chapter 6, which really is anticipating, if we're going to look at Erikson's theory, we're anticipating after young adulthood going into generativity. Now, generativity, in terms of Erikson's theory, is the longest period, although we're looking at that adolescence, emerging adulthood, young adulthood can be pretty long too. But once we've established adulthood and we start to do the things that are going to become our legacy, it's our jobs, it's our careers, it's our vocations and those kinds of things. So I kind of divide them out into the major areas in which we, particularly in the West, in which we define our legacy. And one is family. And then, of course, we have work. And with work, I put in the other activities, hobbies, and others that for some people are very important aspects of their lives. I believe should be. There should be hobbies that you have that are very important to your life. So not all work. So what are the ways in which you play? And so we start with family, and we're going to take a look at this at a little bit from a cognitive point of view. The first, going back to Piaget, is over time we have been developing an increasingly complex schema as to what family means. So right from birth, that origin family or whatever you've gone through in terms of that, and then the family relations that you have, extended family, then friends and acquaintances and whatnot, and what then becomes your idea of what family is. Now, that schema is incredibly complex. The idea of what family is. I mean, there's studies now that talk about the familial components of gang membership, or when people join the military and the family sort of areas of that. You know how that represents a family, and so these are pretty they're pretty amazing, and it also gives me a really good opportunity to apply one of the theories that plays central in my puzzle pieces theory, and that's James Marcia's identity status theory. Now, James Marcia's identity status theory he studied Erikson, and he was looking at the ways in which people transition through the stages of the lifespan and the way that they've developed their identity. And with that, at the same time, the emerging model within psychology, particularly human development, is constructivism. Now, constructivism is the notion that we build schemas. This is very Piaget. We build schemas through experience, through accommodation and assimilation. Those are the words that Piaget used, and we actively construct internal representations of the world around us, including family in this particular case, including the self, including the world, including individuals and concepts, or all of these things. We construct them. And I also work with a friend of mine, a colleague named Stephen Larshell, who is into 3D printing, and we're utilizing a methodology called constructionism. You have constructivism, which is the internal representation of ideas and notions as schemas. And then there's constructionism, which is you use tools such as 3D printing or art or clay or music or whatever, and you create an artifact that represents in the physical world, the musical world or the art world, or that schema. And that process of translating what is an internal schema into an external artifact, an object, in this case a 3D printed object, can be very, very instructional and very, very reflective. in terms of understanding the self. So, we have Marcia's theory. Now, if you don't know about Marcia's theory, here's what it means. It means that we arrive upon defining aspects of our identity through two processes that he named crisis and commitment. Now, these are terms that are used in other contexts, so it's important that we understand what Marcia is saying here. By crisis, he means that we are looking at the options that we can choose from to define this aspect of our personality or our self. Commitment is when we pick one of those. Now, the word crisis is apt in its other applications within this model because sometimes we may have arrived at a particular point in our lives where we feel we have looked at the options and we picked one, but then something comes along. Let's say in a marriage, you dated, found the perfect partner, got married, and then it dissolves in a divorce and you go into crisis. You're now looking at the options again. What do I do? Do I stay single? Do I enter the dating world? All those. It opens up the door again for you to do exploration. So that word crisis can have that meaning. But for now, let's really focus on the idea that if we take every aspect of our identity, all these little pieces that make up our identity, this is the model of puzzle pieces, my theory of identity development. Each one of these pieces making a picture that we call the self. Each one of those is subject to this process, looking at the options or and committing. So I have a series of graphics to kind of look at this here. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to put down the side over here. I'm going to put, as an example of showing how Marcia's theory works, I'm going to put ideas associated with our definition of family. So we might look at marriage, children or not, pets, where you live, career, friends, the things you possess or want to possess, gender roles, and future planning. Is there another one? Oh, an extended family. Now, consider that each one of these, let's say the family schema is very complex, made up of lots of little pieces, and those are the little pieces that make up family, or a collection of them, not all of them, but a collection of each one of those. And each one of those at any given point can reside in one of four statuses. Now, each piece can only be in one status at a time, and they may move from one status to the next, as we'll see with my example. Now, the statuses themselves are defined as diffusion, moratorium, foreclosure, and achievement. Now, diffusion refers to pieces of our identity where we have not looked at the options and we have not made any commitments. These are things on the back burner. They're things that are part of our identity, but we're not decided and we're not working on those things. So let's just say for me, where I want to live when I'm retired. Not retired yet, really. So I'm not thinking about that now, and I'm not looking at the options, and I'm not considering making any commitments to any. So that's in diffusion. Now, the next one we have is moratorium. Now, moratorium refers to the fact that I am actively looking. So let's say I was retired and we decided we're going to move someplace, and I'm, looking on websites and I'm actively engaged in the process. I'm in crisis. I'm looking at the options. Then if from that process of looking at the options, I pick one, I move into that bottom category, achievement. This is the goal. that I will have looked at the options and made a commitment for achievement. Now, the last one here, foreclosure, actually refers to aspects of our identity that were bequeathed upon us, and there wasn't a whole lot of looking around at the options. So your family of origin, um, our sex, some of the gender qualities, the value systems we were taught as a kid, the fact that we were abused or not abused or anyone, those are things that were out of our control, become part of our identity, and they become foreclosed because they are, there's a commitment to them in that they're there, and then, but there was no real choices going on. So let's take a look at each one of these characteristics of what we would call family. And let's, at the start of this relationship that I'm going to be talking about, let's put these in their places where we might find them. So they've got married, so marriage goes into achievement. They've dated other people, they found each other, and now they're married. As to children, let's say there's an active discussion going on right now, but they haven't decided whether they're going to have children or not. As far as pets are concerned, well, they had pets before when they were single, and those pets are still alive, so they're stuck with them, right? So those pets, I'll put those into foreclosure. As far as where their living is concerned and their career, they've made decisions about where they're going to live and where they're working. Their friends, similar to the pets, not to make them equal to them, but they came in with both having friends, and those are friends are part of their identity now. As far as possessions are concerned, as a new couple, they're looking at maybe they're going to buy a boat now that they can afford more things with two incomes going in. Gender roles pretty much learned from childhood, two people entering into a relationship. And it's interesting because sometimes these are not really talked about. You would think after a long period of dating, you would come across the gender role expectations of your partner, and you will have agreed with those. And then you decide to live with that person, but that doesn't always happen. Sometimes those gender roles don't come out until after or much later. So as far as future planning is concerned, they're young adults, they're not thinking about retirement or anything like that. And extended family, of course, is within foreclosure. Now, along comes a crisis, a loss of job. Now watch what happens, and just one individual in this couple loses their job, and suddenly a whole bunch of these things move into moratorium. Still thinking about children, but now those possessions, maybe that's going to go on the back burner. New career, maybe they have to move. Who's going to be the breadwinner if there's gender roles associated with that? If they move, are they going to be away from extended family, or maybe they'll move toward extended family? Their friends might change, all of these things. So they move toward a reset. So these aspects of identity, all of which compose the family schema, start moving around, and they reposition themselves. So now the idea of extended family, children, they moved away from the extended family. It's a new job. Things are a little rattly right now, so they're not going to think about children. They're certainly not going to buy that boat. In moratorium now, that because they are possibly moving to a new location, they need new friends. They're going to get into some future planning to make sure that this never happens again. And maybe their pets can or may not be able to go with them. Their career at this point and the location, because of the immediacy of this thing, they've had to get into the next job, might not have been the one that they would have taken their time to go after, kind of depending how this process. This is just an example. But the career and location go into foreclosure because they were forced out of their job, the loss of job, and now they're unemployed or they're forced into the next job. Meanwhile, marriage is continuing, and maybe those gender roles they got talked about a little bit more. Who is going to do what now that one person's unemployed, or we're transitioning, and maybe there's been a discussion and a reaffirming of those gender roles. So what you see from this is the dynamic way in which Marcia's theory describes how our internal schemas, in this case of family, transition and change as components of each one of these pieces move from one status to the other. And you could probably use this as a model for stress. When things happen and things start getting shaky, those things that were achieved are no longer achieved anymore. These are stressful things. So this is a way of identifying why some of these major transitions can be really disruptive and stressful, because they're identity crisis. They relate to that whole concept of family. And that's just family. We haven't even looked at the self, or their idea of legacy, or any one of the things that they've committed to all along, and how those things get pretty wiped out with an instance like that. So I hope that's helpful in getting your head wrapped around how Marcia's theory works. Now, switching to career, and certainly we saw that activity. We saw individuals who moved, who had achieved careers, and they lost their jobs, so that moved into foreclosure, and hopefully they're going to look at options and recommit and get that. So they'll go into moratorium, and then they'll go into achieved. Now, there have been all kinds of models out there about factors that influence the way in which we pick our professions and our vocations, the things that are passionate about. And this is central, particularly in our culture here in the US and many Western countries, because what we do really has a very huge impact on our sense of worth in a society that is essentially driven by economics. So what you do, the status of that, how much you get paid, how what kind of quality of life you have, and all of those things, your reputation and whatnot, all centering around work, that feeds into a lot of aspects of our sense of self. So just kind of a laundry list here. There's a human development model by Super. And that individual looked at the changing roles that we have. So let's say we could look at a family. We could look at the vocation within a family. It's not a paid job, usually. We might I started off as a son, and then I was a boyfriend, then I was a husband, then I was a father, and then I'm a grandfather. And each one of those roles happens sort of in that order. Usually moving the normative change of that happens in that order, and Super really focused on that. We might even see that in a career. We start off, entry level, then we move up skill level, maybe we transfer to a different department, move up, then maybe we supervise some people, we do some trainings, and then we move up. And depending how we move up the career ladder over time, changes, and it changes who we think we are and the roles that we have, and it changes that schema. So then we move into the social learning model, that we choose careers based on the role models around us. For example, I was talking to a colleague who teaches in physical therapy and was remarking how many of those students in the physical therapy program had received physical therapy at some time when they were younger. And it inspired them to go into physical therapy. Same with occupational therapy, nursing, any one of those things. The postmodern perspective, this is an interesting one because this is really reflective of what's going on today, where individuals see career as a collection of experiences, that skill sets that individuals and people use jobs in order to develop the self and to feel satisfied with them. Very different model than I was taught. But this idea that I'm going to use jobs to teach me skills, and moving around from job to job in industries has become a norm. And that what I'm building is a brand. I'm building me in terms of my skill sets across different jobs, different environments, sometimes entirely different industries. So that's an interesting model. There's educational choices that we make in terms of going to school and how much training. Do we make that formal? Do we make it on the job, informal training? Do we train while we're in a job, or do we train and then go get the job? All of these things regarding education. And then, real kind of interesting one, happenstance. Happenstance is a career model that's actually arose out of the data associated with individuals who were in the job of their dreams. So imagine that's your job, is to go and interview people that really love their jobs. So studies were done, and what was revealed, interesting, this is the data speaking to us, not our expectations. The data revealed that a very, very large percentage of those individuals that were in their dream jobs never planned nor saw themselves in that job. It happened because of chance encounters, opportunities, doors that opened suddenly, and their readiness to go through that door. So a person happens to be, our individual that just lost their job, so they so rather than stay at home, they decide they're going to go out in public and go into public places and pick up conversations with people. And then that individual is standing at line at Starbucks waiting to get their double, triple mocha caramel lotto or whatever it is. And the person next to them, they build up a conversation, and suddenly it leads to a whole new career for that individual. Maybe they know someone looking for that skill set, and suddenly they're in a job that was never advertised, and it becomes their best job. It is remarkable how common that is. More than chance. That's why it's called happenstance, which is kind of a different term for chance. That brings us to and this is sort of out of order in terms of how I would present these if they're all equal, but I'm actually going to have you look at this one last model very closely. And that's the Holland. We have Super, and these are the theorists, Super, we have Holland. Now, Holland developed a model based on, it's essentially work environments. So let's start there. So he said that there's different types of jobs. Some are what he would call realistic, people doing things, physical materials and whatnot, getting things done. Then there's investigative, thinking and problem solving. Then you got artistic, which is actually creative. Social, which is helping other people. Enterprising, which is sales and negotiations and persuading. And then we have conventional, organizing based on policies and whatnot. Now, within that model, we could take all the jobs that exist within the United States, and we can look at them and we can place them in any one of these categories. Maybe some have more than one category. So you can actually take this test, find out which one is the strongest area for you, and then look at those jobs that fall under this, say jobs that are primarily investigative or primarily creative and whatnot. I'm not, if you're coming to the table and you have absolutely no idea what you want to do, and the oyster's open, you're just gonna, you know, the doors are wide open. I guess I was thinking that, the world is your oyster, that thing. So the doors are wide open. Stay with me here. The doors are wide open as to what you can do. You don't really have any preference. And so, you're going to look at them all. So maybe that's a good use of Holland codes. However, I like to think of this as almost every job, and I've had a lot of different jobs, almost every job has some element of all of these. You will enjoy the parts of your job that align with your preferences. And the other ones, the other stuff, not going to be that great. So as a teacher, it's interesting because the almost all of it are things that I like. I score high on all of these. And a teacher has all of these different things. It's social, you're helping people, it's creative. I like doing these videos and slideshows. I investigate, do research on things. I'm actually doing stuff, you know, setting up labs and whatnot, and then organizing based on principles and guidelines and whatnot. And then maybe the end of it's sort of a sales pitch, right? I'm sort of telling you this information, putting it out there, and like, what do you think? Do you think this is useful information for you or not? So all of these pieces. Now you could even look at your current work, or you look where you're going, and you're going to say, well, I'm going to really like the investigative part of this job. That's what I'm going to strive for. And I'm going to put up with all the other stuff because I love the investigative stuff so much. If you find a job that meets all of these, it's your ideal job. And for me, that was teaching. So, met all of my needs and whatnot. So, given that, what I'm asking you to do, okay? Well, let me get to that in just a second. The discussion for this semester, I'm having you look at that list of parts of the schema for family and have a discussion about any one of those that you want. And throw in the Marcia's status on that. It could be like, oh yeah, me and my partner have been together for 5 years and we're looking for a house. We were doing that. We were actively looking for a house. Then the pandemic hit and one of us lost our jobs. We had to dig into the savings, and now what was in moratorium is now in diffusion. We're not even looking at that anymore, and you see this transition of a change. Getting a discussion and sharing with each other about that. Now the assignment, 3 different parts of the assignments, like 3 mini assignments all in one paper. So the title page, then the first part, identity status. I want you to use Marcia's status theory to describe the decisions you made to enter the degree program you're in right now. So, you're going to start somewhere with diffusion. There was a point in your life you weren't thinking about that. And then what happened? Did you go into moratorium and you started to describe the experiences that you had looking into that? And maybe you wanted to do nursing, or you wanted to do something like that, and it was your current school, or it was Harvard, and you didn't get good enough grades to get a scholarship at Harvard, so you're a little foreclosed, had to go to your second choice, kind of thing. And now that you're there, you're like, okay, this is really good. I've really found my home. But you changed major. So you dropped out of nursing. That went into foreclosure. And then you started looking at other majors, recommitted, and now you're, a social services major or something like that. So describe your process, and please, 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 please don't just do the steps. Use the terms from the theory. This is when I was foreclosed. This is when I was in moratorium. This is when I was in diffusion, and this is achieved. I want you to use those terms to demonstrate that you understand what those mean. The second part, happenstance, bold, happenstance. You got identity status. Then the next section, nice bold heading. Tell me a story about chance encounter that you had that was transformative and led to something very satisfying. And then finally, we get to the Holland codes. I'm going to have you take the Holland test. Now, there's a link in the course book, but I also put a link in the course, on the course timeline. So let me open up the course here. So here we are in the course timeline. And if you go down here, right in this week, right there, I've added this link, the ONET Interest Profiler. That's what they call it. You open that, and it brings you right to this test. If you want to take the test, just press next. If you've taken the test on the other link and you want to enter in your scores, you can do that right here. Just enter your scores. So you take the test or enter the scores from the other link. You're going to get a score for every one of those environments. So if we look at this again, you're going to get a score for realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprise, and conventional. The scores will be different. High scores mean that's a very important part for you. Low scores meaning it's a less important part for you. Take your top three. Your top three give you letters, and those letters correspond on the ONET website to specific careers that have that grouping of your highest preferred areas. It's really cool, actually. It's a really thousands of jobs in this database. This is actually from the original, Department of Labor, data on jobs in America. So you take those three, the top three, and you can look up jobs related to that. The advantage of using the ONET version is ONET is actually that database of all those jobs, and they built in Holland's codes across them all. Very convenient way of getting to the end of this assignment. So what you're doing is you're taking the test, you're getting your codes, and then you're going to how do they align with your current career path? How do they align with your old job? I mean, I've had people answer this question like, oh, now I know why I hated that other job and why I want to do this instead. That was almost all social, and I simply don't like people anymore. So now I'm going into this other job where I'm just working with data, just conventional investigative kind of stuff, and I'm going to just love that, and my scores show that. So I'm asking you to go through that process. So the assignment has three parts: the identity status, where you're looking at your journey of decision making as it relates to Marcia's theory. Then you have happenstance, chance events that have led to significant decisions in your life. And then finally, the Holland scores and how they align with the decisions you've made. This is the personality stuff on work and career and hobbies and stuff like that are all I'm glad they're very advanced. Glad I said hobbies, because sometimes I've met people where the job is secondary. The job exists so I can do the hobby. So you fish. You have fish memorabilia all over the place. You have 50 rods and reels. Your idea of a perfect day is 5 a.m. on a smoky lake, dipping the rod into trying to catch that elusive largemouth bass. And that's your passion. What is it about that fits your codes? And maybe your job is okay, but it pays for fishing. So that's, and so your job doesn't necessarily have to be the core of your identity, but it's still important because we live in an economic world. So you can play around with that. I've had individuals analyze their hobbies using the same tools because their hobbies demonstrated where they were getting those needs met, and it wasn't from their job. So take that. All right, so that's this week. We just have this one chapter 6, some really interesting things to do. Hope you have a lot of fun with them. See you online. Take care and be well.